What is up, everyone? Welcome to another video. This one is going to be on sacred geometry. It's been a long time coming. Y'all have asked for this one. If you guys haven't seen my part one, my initial video to sacred geometry, where I give you the basics of what it is and all the fun things like that, I would highly recommend checking that out, because this is going to be a slightly more advanced level, and we're going to go into some really interesting information around sacred geometry that you probably have not heard before. So I'm really excited to jump into this with you guys. If you haven't subscribed, definitely do that, and let's just get into it. So to go a little bit deeper into what sacred geometry actually is, I just want to highlight that these are not just geometric structures. For example, if you've ever seen a flower of life or Metatron's cube or something like that, these are all sacred geometries. But what actually makes them sacred, right, is that these structures come out of a formula, a principle. And what they're showing us the deep underlying principles of creation. For example, if we take a look at the golden mean, which is based off of the number of phi, right? This is an irrational number, but when we use this number to build things in proportion, what happens is it creates a spiral, and that spiral is found in nature. So what these things are showing us, they're actually showing us how the divine mind crystallizes into physical matter. Now, we live in a world where modern day science believes that matter came first and mind precipitated out of matter. Now, there is a secret doctrine that has been handed down throughout the ages that is the same cross-culturally across the globe, and that is permeated in every single real secret society and initiatory mystery school that does exist today and that has ever existed. It's all the same exact doctrine, and I'm going to be making a video or a series of videos on that. But what the ancients and adepts and initiates of all ages knew is that the universe is actually a mind before matter universe. So matter as we know it is just a dense crystallization of mind, so to speak. And how these thought forms, these divine thoughts, actually become matter is described through these sacred geometric principles or formulas. Another great example of this is the Pythagorean comma, which when used creates a spiralitic scale in terms of music. So it shows us through proportion the correct, perfect octaves on the musical scale, and mapped out, it looks like a spiral. Whereas today we use equal temperament, which creates a completely different geometry that is actually not found in nature. So these mathematical constants, these numbers, when used in a formula, create what we know as sacred geometries. It actually creates that form. So just so you know, that's what's happening. And that form, again, is a representation of the divine mind manifesting in the physical universe. And again, I touched on this in the first video, but we're going to take this a cut deeper now. So many ancient civilizations would incorporate these numbers into their architecture. And that even is handed down into today's age, and even, in the age of the Renaissance and all of the Gothic medieval architecture. These numbers and these geometries are incorporated into these buildings, into these structures. There is really two reasons for this. One is that it is just pleasing to the human soul, because these are natural, organic curves and lines and structures, and they're very pleasing and hospitable to the soul, if you will. But on a higher level, for example, in ancient Egypt, why these geometries, for example, if you were to look at the Great Pyramid of Egypt, sacred geometry is found all over throughout the entire construction. Everything is meticulously and intentionally laid out, because when you build a structure using these geometries, you're actually building a body that can hold a disembodied spirit. So our consciousness has evolved over time. And again, I'm going to make a video on this specifically. But in the beginning, for example, if you were to read the Bible in the beginning of Genesis, the Garden of Eden, human beings did not have the same perceptual awareness that we have today. We weren't yet fully crystallized in matter. And so we actually had a completely different perception. We could perceive the astral dimensions, and we could perceive spiritual beings and come into contact with them. And if you look at the literature, for example, from the Greco-Roman period, if you read the Iliad or the story of Odysseus or any of the Greek myths, all of these things, or even more modern, a recent film that came out was The Northman. Really great film, highly recommended. What I'm about to speak to is written plain as day in that film. The ancient mind, for example, in the Greco-Roman period, they did not have the same sense of self-awareness that we have. Of I'm in my little head separate from the entire world. They didn't have this individuated consciousness that we have today. They didn't have the same sense of interiority. Every decision they made was based off of what this god or goddess told them to do. And this is not just myth. That was not just a metaphor or a poetic phrase. This was literally their lived experience of reality. They would literally see the goddess Athena or the god Apollo. They would literally come to them in a vision and tell them what to do. This was a literal phenomenon that occurred. And so over time, as human beings naturally began to crystallize more and more and more onto the material plane, and we got more and more refined in our ego awareness, we actually became shut off from those spiritual worlds. You know, for example, today our pineal gland is atrophied, whereas in the past it wasn't. That was the main organ of perception. And so as humanity lost contact with the spiritual worlds, what the ancients would do is they built temples to be able to house these gods and goddesses so that we can still interact with them. And if you go even deeper into the secret history of our origins and the real history, you know, of where we came from, that has almost been completely erased. These gods and goddesses actually inhabited bodies of flesh and blood. And again, this is not only in the Bible, this is written in Egyptian records, all of the Greek myths. It's completely permeated in our culture. But our sort of materialistic, scientific, matter before mind worldview that we have today takes it as just myth, when in fact it was not. But through this evolution, these beings, these higher spiritual beings, were no longer able to incarnate. And so what they would do, the ancients would do, is build temples utilizing these sacred geometric structures, which incorporate universal harmonic principles into them to be able to build something that would resonate at a certain frequency to allow that spirit to descend so they can communicate and get information. So these architectures would act as a body of spirit. And if you were to combine that with, for example, the Pythagorean tuning, in the medieval times when people would go to a church service and they'd play on the organ, before we switched to equal temperament and when we had the proper architecture, these sounds that they would play, the music they would play, would actually create standing waves, standing geometric patterns, which is what sacred geometry is. It's frozen, essentially frozen sound, which again I mentioned in the first video. But these standing waves, for example, if you were to listen to play a solfeggio frequency, you could look one up on YouTube and play it on a speaker, you would notice you'd be able to, when you come into the center of where the sound is coming from, it would be very loud. And if you just lean out to the side, it would sound far away. And so it's showing you that it's actually a standing wave. And so when people would come to these services, the music would move through them and actually activate different latent parts of our physiology, and they would have revelatory experiences. They would have direct communion with God. And this is one of the reasons why the church and many other institutions push to switch to equal temperament, because if you can have direct gnosis, there's no need for a middleman, and there, you know, we know how that goes, right? And so while these geometries are found in the body of architecture, they're also found in the human body. You know, Leonardo da Vinci was a great adept. He was actually someone who was initiated into the true Rosicrucian stream, and so he was an initiate, and that's why he was able to pierce the veil so potently. And someone who has, in my mind, kind of forwarded this work in the modern era is someone by the name of Frank Chester. And Frank Chester is someone who has continued the work of Rudolf Steiner, which was the great Austrian initiate of the 20th century. If you don't know him, definitely check him out. But Frank Chester actually discovered a completely new Platonic solid. Now, the Platonic solids, there's only 5 known to be in existence, and they make up the entire geometry of everything in the universe, everything physical in the universe. That's the key, everything physical. And so what Frank Chester discovered, he actually found a completely new Platonic solid. And the interesting bit here is that the shape he discovered, which is called the chestahedron, which I'll show you here, it's named after him, actually represents the geometry of the heart. It is directly proportionate to the shape, the size, and the way the heart is situated in the chest. It's a perfect geometric representation of it. What he has showed us through his work with this shape is that this shape is actually a 0 point. It's something that connects physical space to what we could call counter space, what is beyond space and time. How he discovered this was he took this shape and began diametrically moving the angles, which means you're not changing the actual angle, you're just moving the direction of the angle. And these completely new shapes, geometric structures, were discovered that have never been discovered before. And they follow the same proportional laws as the Platonic solids. There are certain laws, there are requirements that need to be met for it to be considered a Platonic solid. And so what these shapes show us is they actually show us the process of something that is beyond space and time, thought, right? Thought is beyond space and time, the divine mind. So I'm saying we're bringing this full circle. He actually shows geometrically how these thoughts, thought forms, let's call them, actually crystallize geometrically and then come into existence through the 0 point, and in the case of the human body, through the heart. And through this work, this has also been continued by other people, we have seen that the heart is not actually a pump. The heart is a vortex. It's literally a vortex, and it actually spins the blood, and that's why the blood speeds up when it goes through the heart. And that's why the heart creates such a strong electromagnetic field, which is like 100 times stronger than the brain. Heart Math Institute has done some great research on that. But this is why in the Gospel of Luke it said, don't listen to those who say, oh, look here and behold here, this is where God is, this is where the kingdom is, for the kingdom is among you. It's within you. And it truly is, what these geometries are showing us is how through the heart God manifests into physical reality. And interestingly enough, if you study the fields of free energy research, which I've spent many years studying, I've actually been to conventions where I've seen these electrical generators, which are over unity, which means they output more energy than is needed to input into them for them to run. Free energy, right? Interestingly enough, that function, that vortex function of the heart, what that does is it actually creates a pulse where energy from beyond space and time, from counter space, comes into physical reality and boom, adds a little extra. And that's again why the blood goes faster through the heart. It's not a pumping mechanism though, it's a vortex-like pulse. And this shows us that we're an open system. This is not closed system, so it does not break any law of thermodynamics for my physics nerds out there. But anyway, interestingly enough, that same function of this vortex that allows an impulse to enter is modeled in the generators that these inventors are creating. So what they do is they find a certain speed of the rotor that hits a certain frequency, which creates a certain resonance that essentially builds this type of field, this type of vortex-like motion, which creates a field effect and allows an extra input of energy to come into physical space from counter space and enter into the system. And so in the future, you're going to be seeing a lot of, hopefully, technologies like this come out, and they're utilizing these sacred principles of creation that are modeled in sacred geometry. That's why it's called sacred geometry. It's written across the cosmos that there is an intelligent creator designing all of this, and that we have a place in this. We're not alienated and separate. This stuff is literally happening through us, and the ancients knew this. It was just forgotten. So we're not discovering anything, we're rediscovering things. So I just wanted to give you guys like a broad stroke. There's a lot here, you might want to watch it back. Let me know in the comments what you liked, what you want me to go deeper on. I'm going to be creating videos on a lot of specific things that I talked about in here, but I just wanted to give you guys a general broad stroke of this because it's been a while. So I hope you liked the video. Thank you so much for being here with me, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.